What's up? I'm going to show you how to use the new Scene Manager to move one object from one scene to another scene without having an additional extra scene. Um, in the previous video I showed how to use an extra scene that just has any object that you want to keep the entire game, whether it's the player, the camera, any kind of managers, score managers, any kind of variables that you want to exist forever, whatever. That's what I use in my game. However, some people don't want to have an extra scene running, or maybe there's an object that's instantiated in one scene that you want to move to another scene permanently, and you maybe only want to have one scene running. Well, this is how you do that. It's actually a lot simpler. It's only one script and one method. So you can see in my project I have 3 scenes, actually. So in my build settings, I have scene 1 is indexed at 1 and scene 2 is indexed at 2. In your project, if there's only 2 scenes, scene 1 will be 0 and scene 2 will be 1. So that's one difference that could be occurring. So anyways, it's really simple. Scene 1 has the player and a quad and a trigger. It's a simple box collider trigger. No scripts on it. The player has a script called load_move. That's a new script that I created. It has a public variable. That's the next scene index is scene 2. That index is from the build settings. So whatever the next scene is in your project, mine is scene 2, that's the index. The script is a trigger. It has an onTrigger enter function. I'm using a bool that is false at first, and then it is immediately true, so that this coroutine only starts once. Once the coroutine starts, the first thing we do is Scene Manager. Make sure you have the scene management up there. Scene Manager, load scene. This time we're not using async, we're just using load scene to load the scene immediately. We pass the next scene index, and then we're loading it additively. I always load additively because then you choose when to unload. Okay? So then we're going to create an object of type scene. In Unity, scene objects are of type scene. So we're just going to create a scene object, and we're going to name it whatever. I'm naming it next scene. And we're going to set that equal to SceneManager.getSceneAt. GetSceneAt, as you can see, it gets the scene index in the Scene Manager's list of added scenes. That isn't the build settings, that's just however many scenes exist within the game at that current moment. Since we're adding another scene, there will be 2 scenes, right? So it says 1, that's because this is an array. It cycles through an array, and arrays start at 0, they don't start at 1. So 1 is actually the second item, and 0 is the first scene. So we're getting scene number 2. It's actually index number 1. Saving it in the next scene variable. Then in Scene Manager, we're just going to use a function called MoveGameObjectToScene. Very simple, you pass in the object. It's just going to be this game object that the script is attached to, the player game object. And then we're going to send it to the next scene. That's a scene object. This function or method doesn't use an index, it uses an actual scene object. That's why we have to create the scene object. I guess you could actually just use this function there and eliminate that line of code. However, it's always good to cache objects. So I guess that's kind of an additional line of code. But anyways, then so that'll load the next scene, and that'll move this object that the script is attached to that scene. Then we're going to wait a frame, and we're going to go to Scene Manager, unload scene. We're going to unload whatever the next scene index is in the build settings -1, and that's going to be the current scene. We're using a yield function mainly because a coroutine requires a yield function, and also Unity might freeze if you unload scenes immediately from the same script that you're loading it, or at the same within the same frame that you're loading the next scene additively. yeah, so just keep in mind that load scene and unload scene uses indexes from the build settings, so whatever these are, and then get scene at is using an index from however many scenes, the array of all the scenes that are loaded within the scene. Okay, so that's it. That's the entire code. So you'll see, we'll just take a look at scene 2 really quickly, just to see what it is. There's nothing in scene 2, it's just a quad. And then scene 1 is just a quad with the player and that trigger. Once the player enters the trigger, the next scene will load, the player will transfer there and will unload the first scene, and you'll see now we just have scene 2 and the player is within that scene. So that's how you move an object from one scene to another without any additional scenes using the function MoveGameObjectToScene. And yeah, just probably use a coroutine so you can control when everything happens and whether there's any pauses that need to occur. Thank you. Have a good one.